All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our last session on this round of the Forage Forum Fridays. So we're excited that you've been able to join us for this round for the last, just looking today, last 11 weeks. So we're excited to have you with us today. So today I'm excited to have with me Brooke Stefancik. She's the A&R and 4-H educator in Sullivan County. And then Mark Kepler, he's the Ag and Natural Resource Educator and interim 4-H educator over in Fulton County. So we're excited to have them both with us today, and they are going to be sharing kind of what livestock production labeling is, kind of what those little stamps mean when we're in the store and things like that. So with that, I will leave it to both of you.
Well, I'm going to get to start this out, and Brooke's going to be running the slide deck as we go along here. And so we're going to be talking about livestock production labeling, and that's kind of a big, wide open category if you think about it, and what all the things can mean to that. So as we get through this, we're going to cover a few things today that we know along those lines. And then maybe when we get done, if somebody else can think of some other types of programs, we can kick them in at the end there a little bit to it. So let's go on with the next slide there. Um, so one of the things that I'm going to talk about is animal welfare labeling and other types of labeling that we might find in the livestock. And many of the ones we're looking at here in this national survey that was done 4 years ago about these different types of labels and percentage of people that responded to them who actually look for these labels on a product. USD organic, Brooke is going to cover a little bit later on and talk about looking for that label on there. And that is a USDA label, and she'll get into that. Then the other ones we're going to see down below are some of these non-GMO. Of course, some people are really involved with that. Then I've got several animal welfare labels that come along that people look specifically for those animal welfares. And with my part of the program, we're going to talk about how we come up with those animal welfare programs. And we're also going to talk about agencies that verify and who does the verification process. But only when we talk about USDA are they involved in certain aspects of this whole thing. Okay. So let's look at the next slide. Animal welfare labeling is what I'm going to talk about. Animal welfare, there are audits and certification programs out there, not USDA. They are independent audit and certification programs. Because we're looking at increased public and consumer concerns about raising animals humanely, that's why these voluntary animal welfare certification programs have been developed. Okay. Next one. So if we think about animal welfare, they have come up with these 5 freedoms that they refer to in the welfare process. Freedom from hunger and thirst. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Freedom from discomfort. So we don't have any pain or anything giving us pain, or we have the ability to lie down and get up and walk and have those type of abilities. Freedom from pain and injury or disease. Freedom to express normal behavior. That gets a little bit more subjective as to what that might be. And in some of the processes, we're going to look at some of the ways they've done that with some animal livestock. And then freedom from fear and distress, that also is a little more subjective. And we'll go to the next slide. So the certification programs are all voluntary, and there are food retailers out there that are driving these audit programs for certification. These food retailers are saying, yes, I want to have certified animal welfare products. And so farmers can participate in programs, but these programs are now put on by a variety of different non-government programs, and we call them auditing programs here. And I'll go through a few of them as we get towards the end of the year, but there are other companies that are in audit programs, I should say, not companies, but a lot of those are in the process. And many of those auditing programs go through the USDA to make sure that the audit programs are in compliance, but you do not get a USDA label put on there that says it's audited or it's welfare label. And lots of times For example, if I was selling to Whole Foods, for example, Whole Foods will have what they call not their own auditors, but third-party auditors, people that are in the business. So you can go out and you can find organizations, companies, for-profit companies around who do auditing, and they may audit for several different ones of these different programs. So those are out there. So next slide, please. And so when you get certified into the program, you have to look an application into it. Somebody comes out and inspects the farm, who is one of these general third-party auditors, and they will give a audit report and make sure that you maintain certain specific standards for animal welfare auditing. And so most of these programs usually have a scientific advisory council, professors from universities who are adept at the animal welfare industry or a part of it, who do research in it, and they will come up with these standards and these certification programs that are a part of these audit programs. Okay, next slide. This is just happens to be an example of some of these welfare certification programs. The American Humane Society is one label that you may see on a product. They have been around for a long time and they are fairly large. The Animal Welfare Approved is a totally different label. Certified Humane Raised and Handled, that's another label. The Food Alliance, the Global Animal Partnership, American Grass Fed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that one a little bit here. Farm Animal Care Training and Auditing, that's another. I could add to this list the Mark Kepler Welfare Certification Program. If I go ahead and develop something and I have the audit program put in place, and if somebody's willing to accept that as a label for their products, that it's out there. So these aren't the only ones that are here. And there's a potential for a whole lot of other programs coming along. And they all have their different standards and they all have their little nuances. And so we'll get into some of those nuances as we look into this. Okay, Steph, Brooke. Just some labels that you might see on the different products that are animal welfare type labels. Certified Humane, at the top, I see Global Animal Partnership. I will talk about that one some more. All these different organizations. And does it get confusing? You better believe it does. There's a lot of different potentials here where we could go for different ones, but it depends on what my market is. If I'm selling to this market, then they'll say, well, you have to have ones that are humane and farm animal care certified, or you have to have animal welfare certified, or which ones you might have. So next slide. So I'm going to just pick on one of them just to take a look at the American Grass-Fed Labeling. So that's the next one. So they had worked with USDA a long time ago to define what grass-fed means, because that's a word that gets really confusing and people can use it in a lot of terms. Are your animals on your place grass-fed? I expect every single one of us have livestock that are beef or sheep or goats that are forage-based. They are grass-fed. And so they had to come up with a definition of what grass-fed is. And now USDA no longer has that definition. They tried to establish it, and I think it just got so complex they stepped away from it. So that's the label for American Grass-Fed. So if I am with that organization and I want to have my animals certified by American Grass-Fed, I have to have an auditor who is connected with that organization, a third-party auditor that comes out to my place and will do that American Grass-Fed. Okay, Brooke. I just went onto their website, American Grass-Fed, took a look at the map across the United States, and this just happens to be their people that they have certified in that area. So I could go on to here, I could click on one of these on the computer and find out who those American Grass-Fed certified people are with that organization. Next, Brooke. So one of their criterias are animals are fed only grass and forages when from weaning until harvest. So obviously they're given milk ahead of time, so that falls into that category. They are raised on pasture without confinement. Okay, well, that makes sense for grass-fed. Then we get into this other aspect that many of these other organizations that have animal welfare labeling goes along with, and are these never been treated with antibiotics or growth hormones. So those kind of pop in. Are those issues of animal welfare? In my mind, they're not, but um, that's how they pop into these labeling systems, and they are put on there. And then on this situation with American grass-fed, uh, their criteria is that the animals have to be born and raised on American family farms. Now, by that criteria, it doesn't say the same farm. It could be a variety of different farms, but it has a little bit more leeway with that. Okay, Brooke, the next slide. So also they say they have to be raised and finished on open grass pastures where perennial and annual forbs and grasses and legumes and are consumed. Post-harvest crop residue without grain are the sole sources of energy. If you got my place, the combine was never good. When I turn those cattle out on corn stalks, they're going to get some corn. They're going to get some grain. They also say you can use ensiled hay, haylage, and silage from the above sources may be fed to the animals while in pasture during inclement weather or low quality forages. Middle of winter, obviously you don't have this nice, beautiful field out here to put your grass-fed animals onto that can eat grass, and so they have to have other sources during those time periods. Okay. So then I want to jump to the Global Animal Partnership. This is one that's hooked up with Whole Foods. In fact, Whole Foods has started into that process. And with the Global Animal Partnership, they have these 5 different certification categories. So it's like not only am I animal welfare certified, but the next thing is I am certified in different areas. And as we go up the ranks, we can do it. So I'll go into these a little bit. For example, animal welfare certified number 2, enriched environment. We had an opportunity to go on some tours of some chicken houses that are animal welfare GAP certified. And as you go into those chicken houses, they put certain toys, if you want to use that terminology, in there for those chickens to explore. And those were enough to cause it an enriched environment by having these different toys in there, little perches, places to get onto, just different items in there for them to peck at. Then also those same houses had a little opening out the side, and those chickens could go outside. So they had outdoor access. It wasn't a big area. Not the time we were there, there wasn't a chicken out there, but they had the ability to go out into the outdoor if they wanted to and go out and check things out. Now, these were very young chicks at the time we were there, so they were less inclined to be going outside. As they get older, they might do that. So then the next thing we could look at is pasture raised. In pasture raised would be obviously livestock that's raised in a pasture, and they're around that pasture their whole lives. Then we've got animal centered. What animal centered means, you can't even castrate these males in this situation, and so it's a different category that goes up that line. You can't castrate or dehorn or do anything like that to them, and that's what animal centered is. And then you go to the 5th level. Entire life on a farm means just exactly that. They never leave the place. They don't even leave the place for slaughter. They are slaughtered on the same farm. So you can have different degrees, different categories of animal welfare certification. And these are the different companies they have. And every year or twice a year, an auditor will come around, check these out, take a look at them, and see if you're following the rules and regulations of these different organizations. Brooke, just a label. It came up, and we'll see some other labels as we go along. This happens to be ground beef. The label on this one is Global Animal Partnership. That's down there in the, yeah, thank you, Brooke. That's down there at the base of the label. She's running around there with that. And it also has a variety of other things on that label. It happens to be the ranch, the place it was raised at, and it has humane care put on there, and it's put on that piece of ground beef, and it's outlined no antibiotics, no hormones along that line. So those are some other things along there. All vegetable feed, gluten free, just a variety of things. But I want you to look at that label, and that label is one that has been put on there. Now, the only exception on this whole label, I'd say, is non-USDA, but on the left-hand lower side down there, that is the USDA stamp that was harvested in a USDA approved facility as far as health standards go, but that has really nothing to do with the humane labeling part of it. Okay, next, Brooke. And then there's this word sometimes we see out there that other people use, and you saw that on that last one. It was said never ever, and we use that term never ever, and never evers means that a couple different things. Cattle, a never ever cattle could be grass fed or grain fed. They may be in a feedlot setting, but usually never ever refers to antibiotics and ionophores and also growth promoting hormones or in implants. So usually when we hear never ever cattle, they never have been treated with antibiotics. They haven't had implants, and that's what we're looking at with that one. Okay, Brooke, I believe I'm turning it over to you.
Yes. So I'm going to kind of cover what are some of the USDA approved labels, and also for some of the label claims, USDA kind of approves them, but they're not really a USDA program. So we'll get into that. And I will say I found most of this stuff in a document called the USDA Animal Raising Claims Labeling Guidelines. Was updated in 2021. So that's the most recent update that we have available to us. And some of the links for this information will be posted with the recording when Alicia posts those on YouTube. So just an introduction, the USDA requires that meat and poultry products are wholesome, not adulterated, which means they can't have added things unless it's marked on the label, and then that the meat products are properly marked, labeled, and packaged according to certain USDA guidelines. So, that they're covered properly to prevent, spread of bacteria and things like that. The little packets that you see that soak up moisture from the bottom of certain meats, all that is kind of included in that packaging requirements from the USDA. So actually, USDA has a subsection called the Food Safety and Inspection Service. So they are the ones that are really responsible for developing and kind of managing the labeling requirements, and also the things that companies can put on labels for meat and poultry products. So they are charged with developing the labeling policy. So they will also determine, they're kind of like the legal entity that has to go through and say, if something is misidentified, misbranded, mislabeled, they would be the one that has the legal repercussions to figure out how to go about fixing that. So we'll get into a few of those a little bit more. So the first kind of labels that we're going to talk about are animal raising claims. So the Food Safety Inspection Service has actually been working on these kind of claims for over 25 years. So it's nothing really new to us. Things have slowly been moving this way. And it's just probably in the past, I would say 5 to 10 years that really consumers have been even more putting more pressure on different label claims and stuff. So labels that use certain claims, they usually refer to the way that the animal was raised, and the Food Safety Inspection Service has to evaluate and approve that somehow. So they have, you have to submit what you want your label to look like for the package to that agency, and then they will approve it based on their kind of requirements. And we'll go through some of those. And some of the labels, it could just be that if you claim something, you have to put kind of the asterisk beside it. And at the bottom, you have to say what that claim actually means. And so then once they approve your label, then you can go through and use it on the product. But you're not supposed to just be able to put labels on products and sell them without being formally approved by the Food Inspection Service. So one fun fact that I found on their website was that in 2019, they received over 200 label applications with animal raising claims per week. So they were going through 200 companies, labels, not necessarily 200 different companies, but 200 labels were coming through their offices a week that they had to evaluate and say either, yes, this label is approved to be put on a product and sold, or no, it's not, you have to change this, and then maybe it can be used. So one of those label claims is raised without antibiotics. So this should be one that most people have seen. And so to use this claim, animals cannot have been given antibiotics in their feed, water, or by injection. And even for poultry, they ask like if the hens that laid the eggs where those animals came from had received certain antibiotics and things like that. So really they do a full line of tracing and questioning for that. So if you want to submit a label that has raised without antibiotics on it, you have to give a written description explaining how you controlled what those animals were getting through, say, their food and water. How did you make sure that they were not given antibiotics, even by accident? You must have a document that describes how the animals were raised, and also a description of the product tracing mechanism. So how do you make sure, even though the animals on your farm the whole time were not given antibiotics, how do you make sure after that they do not come in contact with products through the processing chains that contain antibiotics to really keep that product pure throughout the whole process? And then also they have to have a description on how they will identify and control animals that may have been exposed to antibiotics, or it could be those animals that got sick. They had to treat them with antibiotics, and so they will have to go through a separate food chain process than the other animals. So a lot of documentation that has to be submitted in order to use that claim. So this is just an example of a label. You can see on the bottom here, it says no antibiotics ever. So that's just one way that it's used. It's got some other claims on here as well. And so over the past few years, companies usually are starting to not provide antibiotics anyway. So most products in the store, I would say, have not had antibiotics that you would be able to buy. But there's also other claims for this. It could be raised without subtherapeutic antibiotics. That means in previous years, we would give antibiotics to animals as a prevention measure. You know, when you have a lot of animals housed in one place, it's more common to get disease that way. So companies would just give a little bit of antibiotics, say through the feed or the water, just to prevent those things. Most people, if you've raised chicks before, the first feed that you give them is usually medicated. And so that could be considered, you know, getting an antibiotic. For some of those local farmers who are raising chicks, most of the feed that you get would not be considered eligible to use this label. There's also no antibiotics for growth promotants. So sometimes if we give antibiotics, it makes animals perform better. And so we've gotten away from allowing that also. And so those are just all kinds of different antibiotics claims that you could see on packaging in the store. The next claim, with which Mark talked about a little bit, but he talked specifically about a third-party organization that does grass-fed. So I could still label products as grass-fed through food service inspection with this documentation I'm going to talk about, and it doesn't necessarily have to go through that other grass-fed program. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. But this is just my company has applied for a label for my product, and I don't have any third-party certifiers that are coming out and saying, hey, I have Mark Kepler's certification for my product. It's just I'm telling people that my product is grass-fed. So these kind of claims can only be made for meat and meat product labels derived from cattle that were fed only 100% grass or forage after being weaned from their mother's milk. So, you know, obviously when they're starting their life, they have to have that first milk, you know, to get them through until they are big enough and have the digestive system to process forage. And most of them require that they also have access to pasture. So not just forage where we're sticking them in a feedlot and feeding round bales of hay. We want them to be able to go out and have access to pasture. So what documentation is needed to put this kind of claim on a label? They must include a description explaining the controls for ensuring from birth to the time of slaughter. How did they make sure that they did not get any grain in their diet? How do you make sure that the neighbor doesn't come over and decide they're gonna, give some grain out to the animals? Some of those things that could occur. A signed and dated document. So you are signing and affirming that everything you are saying is true. That describes the diet of the animals. So exactly what they are fed, from pasture to hay or other products. A description of the product tracing mechanism. So like we talked about before, how do you make sure that that meat from the time it leaves your farm to the time it gets on the shelf is not contaminated with a product that would not conform to that labeling claim? And then also, how do you take those animals that maybe had to have grain or, for whatever reason did not meet that claim? They are not allowed to go through the same process to make it to the shelves as the other animals. So some of the claims that you could see for these include grass-fed, vegetarian raised, or I think some of these. So some will say, except for dairy products fed from birth to 8 weeks, etc. And so here are some examples of labels for grass-fed. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about organic later, but organic has other requirements, access to pasture, other things. And so really, if you see organic grass-fed, I would be a little bit more confident in that than a random label that says grass-fed that's not organic. So you just have to look for like the asterisk that says, what does that mean? And so I found this product that I thought was very interesting. A lot of these were popping up as I was looking for labels online. So there must be a market for this kind of protein powder. And here it says grass-fed whey protein. So that was new to me to see a product like this. And I also thought, you kind of look here on this label. When I first saw it, I thought this said organic because I wasn't paying attention. You know how your brain can kind of trick you. This Orgain brand name looks very similar to how a lot of people write organic on different products. And so it can be a little bit tricky to make sure if you're looking for certain things in the store, really take a minute to look and read that label and see, what it may actually mean. The next sort of claims are refer to the environment animals were raised in. So they call these living and raising conditions. So really the Food Service Inspection has not defined these claims specifically in regulations. So these kind of labels usually have to say what standards are they using to define that claim. So one of the examples I have here are cage-free. So a lot of eggs you'll see, and we'll see on the next label, cage-free, and then there's an asterisk by it, and later it says, what does that mean to that farm? So chickens were never confined to cages during raising, could be an example of what that asterisk would say. That doesn't mean that they have access to the outdoors and are free roaming on pasture or anything. That just means they're in a big barn without cages. They just have a big floor and they're, running around. There are some third-party certifiers that will give these kind of claims, but they're not quite as common as with some of the other labels that we were talking about. So some other kind of labels are cage or crate-free, free range, not confined, free roaming, pasture-fed, pasture-grown, meadow raised. That's one I haven't personally seen. So if anyone's seen a label that says meadow raised, I'd be interested in seeing that. So if they are making a claim and saying, hey, we were approved by a third party, you have to include that third party's information on the label. So here's a couple examples of the cage-free. So here you can see 12 large cage-free eggs. So what does cage-free mean? Well, right here it says hens are free to roam, nest, and perch in a protected barn. So we know they're kept in a barn. They probably don't have access to outdoors, but they're in an open barn that has nest boxes maybe, or some sort of nesting area. And I also have perches, so they can get up and kind of do their natural perching and nesting behaviors in that barn. Then the other one I have here, cage-free egg whites. See the asterisk again, we move down here. Hens are free roaming inside a barn. So all we know is that they have a barn and that they're inside of it. It's a little bit less specific than the other labels, so we don't necessarily know if they have the nests and the perches available to them in that barn. The next one is raised without hormones. So for this claim, animals cannot have been given hormones from birth to harvest. So there are some species that hormones are not even approved for use in. That includes poultry, goats, veal calves, and mature sheep. So sometimes we'll see poultry labels that say raised without added hormones. Well, they're legally not allowed to use that. So all poultry in the store that you see could have this label claim on it because it's not allowed in the first place. And so like my point at the bottom says, since there are no hormones approved for use in that species, if they are claiming that in a fancy way on their label to attract attention, they also have to have that asterisk that says, well, there are no animal products that you can buy that would have that anyway. So, you know, it looks really nice when you put it on a label and it's fancy and stuff, but really, you know, all products from the cheapest to the most expensive in that area for poultry, for goat meat and stuff would not have the hormones. So this is an example of the package. So here it says, you know, no hormones or steroids added. It's all natural. So what does all natural mean? That's another label. So like we said, if they want to claim it, they can, but they have to say what it means. So down here, what does all natural mean? It's minimally processed and has no artificial ingredients. So basically the only thing in that package is chicken. And then here, no hormones or steroids added. And we'll go down to the bottom. Well, the federal regulations prohibit the use of hormones or steroids in poultry anyway. So it doesn't really have to be on the label because it's already not allowed. Any questions so far? Not seeing any pop up.
Nope, there's none in the chat box at this time.
Alrighty. So the last thing I'm going to get into is just a brief overview. There's so much involved in the kind of nuances of becoming registered and using the labels for USDA organic. So we're just going to touch on it. And again, there'll be some resources in the recording kind of description, but just kind of give a big overview of what does it mean if you see a USDA organic label in the store. So USDA has established a national organic program, and it's the federal regulatory program that enforces the standards for US products that are labeled with the label you see on the screen. So third parties can become accredited to be certifiers for USDA organic. So basically, you know, if USDA doesn't have enough people that can go out and be certifiers, they're getting help from these other organizations so they can get everybody certified that's interested. So any product that contains that label USDA organic has to have been certified by the National Organic Program certifiers or a third party that was accredited by them. They have to be produced without the prohibited products or methods, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But they can be produced with allowed substances. So there's a really long list that you can go and find of all the substances that are allowed in USDA organic. The simple way to think about organic is you're generally not allowed to use synthetic materials in production, except for in some cases. So you really have to read the fine lines of what that means in kind of the label, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But if you're really interested in what is allowed and prohibited, then I would recommend looking at the recording links to see the full list of these things. These are just a few things that I picked out of here. So what are some prohibited things that you cannot use if you want to use the USDA organic label? So you cannot use any kind of drug to promote growth in the animals. Another example, I thought this was interesting, but I hadn't really heard of before, but it makes sense now that I think about it from a cattle perspective. You cannot feed plastic pellets to animals for roughage. So cattle in their stomachs, they need some kind of fiber to kind of keep their rumen healthy. And so I guess some people were using the plastic pellets in replacement of, forages and natural roughage. So that is not allowed in USDA organic labeled products. You cannot feed any formulas that contain urea or manure. So some cattle are given urea to increase the protein content of their feed. It is a protein kind of supplement, but that is not allowed to be fed under the USDA organic label. No synthetic parasitides. So think wormers and mite control and stuff like that for animals. And you cannot use a synthetic substance that's not listed on the approved list. So there's a lot of big asterisks with this on things that are or are not approved, certain scenarios where things may be approved if there's no other options. Just a lot of little things to get into. So what are some requirements for animals for their housing? If you want to use the label, they have to have year-round access to the outdoors. They must have access to shade, shelter, be able to exercise. They should be getting fresh air, clean water, and have the ability to stand in direct sunlight if they choose to. They must get a minimum of 30% of their diet from fresh grass during the grazing season. So even more so than not just forages, but has to be grass. And they expect that the grazing season should be a minimum of 120 days. So they want those animals out on pasture eating fresh grass for at least 120 days a year. You have to document all the feeds that go into that animal. So anything that goes into that animal, you have to have documentation for. And the animals must also have access to clean, dry bedding. So my question when I looked at that was, okay, so they have to be grazing that long. Are they having to maintain a good forage stand? Because, I've seen a lot of overgrazed pastures in Indiana specifically. And so I'm like, okay, are they allowed to just throw them out there and say they're grazing? But they actually make those producers go through a pasture plan with a local conservation office. So think NRCS, the soil and water offices. I'm not sure, but I'm hoping like the extension service or Purdue Extension would also fit. If Alicia, Mark, or Dr. Johnson have any inputs on that, we can talk about it at the end here. So the pasture plan must be updated annually. The pasture has to be managed as an organic crop, and they actually measure the quantity and quality of the pasture. So they want them to go through and kind of take stock, what's out in my pasture, how many animals can this pasture really support? Can I really provide the right amount of grazing for these animals for 120 days? So it really forces that producer to go through and create a really good forage management plan. They must also do preventative measures against crop pests, weeds, and disease. So yes, they can go out on pasture, but it forces them to not let the pastures, get overly weedy. They must be able to prevent, diseases. So, funguses and stuff like that could be spreading within that pasture. They have to have different management plans to prevent those things. And most of the time they want them to be prevented culturally. So without the use of pesticides. So what are some things that we can do, just by managing the ground better to prevent those things? And then they also need to maintain or improve the soils. So they want to see increases in organic matter. They want to see, decreased erosion control to decrease erosion, protect natural wetlands. Just a bunch of stuff that goes into this plan that I wish everyone would do. So I think we can learn a little bit of something from this section on really creating good pasture plans for animals. So then what always gets me is the allowed substance list. So I would encourage you to take a look at some of these links to read the list if you're interested. A lot of people think the organic label means the animals were never eating anything, and that's not necessarily true. So there are things that are allowed, both in vegetable, even from vegetables all the way to meat products. If they have the organic label on them, it doesn't mean they didn't receive anything ever. So they are allowed aspirin, which I thought was interesting. They can be vaccinated. There are some medicines allowed, and I didn't grab any specific ones because there was 3 or 4, but some, regular medications are allowed if the veterinarian prescribes it and says that they need it. They will have to follow different withdrawal times for those medicines, but they still can receive those and stay in the organic kind of path. The next 2 products there, fenbendazole and moxidectin, those are wormers. So they are allowed to use those wormers if their natural controls of pasture rotation are not working. They just have to make sure they follow the correct withdrawal time for those. Copper sulfate is a product that can be used both in animals, so say treating hoof rot, to preventing diseases in like vegetable or pasture crops. There's a really wide range if you get into copper sulfate of things that it is used for, so that's interesting. Herbicides are allowed for farm maintenance, so they don't want you spraying a bunch of herbicides in your pastures and stuff, but you're allowed to control weeds around the farm. So in your driveways, ditches, and other areas like that, if you want to control weeds, you are allowed to use herbicides in those areas. And then the other one that was interesting to me were pheromones. So you can use different pheromones, which are just like kind of smelly substances that will attract or send away insects. So that is a kind of organic approved control for insects other than insecticides that kind of naturally tell the insects go here and don't go there. So I thought that was interesting. And I will say one more thing about the organic. So in order for someone to get certified in organic, they have to be operating as an organic farm for 3 years before that certification can really go through. So that is another interesting thing. So they kind of have to take the hit because it's more expensive to kind of do the organic route for 3 years before they can actually sell that product as organic in the store. All right, Mark, I think it's your turn to take over these last few slides.
Yeah, there are a few different certification programs throughout the states that are existing out there. That could be hay certification programs, and normally they're after weed species. So the next slide, Brooke. For example, in Indiana, the Indiana Crop Improvement Association is the official designated decertifying for noxious weed-free. And now what that means is there are certain weeds that are referred to as noxious, and they are listed on the state, and they will go, you can take this hay sample, send it away to the Crop Improvement Association and have it certified as weed-free. I also looked up, I found Minnesota has that type of out there. It may contain weeds, but again, they can have specific invasive species of weeds that they refer to in their legal requirements. So those are other ones that exist out there. I don't know anybody taking advantage of the Indiana Crop Improvement Association one, and I don't know how well these are in other states, but they do exist. Okay, Brooke. And then I just throw this one out. There's no official eradication program. There's no official that I know of out there, but the blister beetle, especially out west, can be in hays. Blister beetles are potentially deadly to horses if they consume hay that has blister beetles, dead blister beetles, live blister beetles. It doesn't matter because it causes their lips to blister and have issues with them being able to swallow, and they're a definite force that we have to worry about as producers. So sometimes people will advertise their hay as blister beetle free. And unless somebody can straighten me up on that one, I don't know of any national program, state ran or anything like that blister beetle free program out there. But that is another source that you can take a look at. Okay, Brooke, I think it's time for questions, and we'll be open to questions, and also be open to any other programs that anybody else knows about that are certification programs that go along with forages or livestock.
All right, thank you both. I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll for this week while we're taking a couple minutes. So if you
Yeah,
wanna-
this is Keith.
Yep.
So I'd like to have you guys just reflect on, and I know it's a little bit off topic, but I think it's important, is if you feel comfortable in doing so, is just talking about the labeling of seed for sale, in terms how about that goes, and a little bit about the seed label.
Say, Brooke, you want to take that one?
I can. So, one of the important things to look at when you're, especially I'm going to focus on forage seed because I think that's what Dr. Johnson is referring to. So forages, when you purchase seed, you really want to look critically at that seed tag. So it should tell you the variety. And so if you, sometimes it will say variety not stated or VNS. If you see that, you are not sure really what you are getting. So be cautious of that. If you are looking for a high quality specific product with disease resistance, you're not guaranteed anything where the variety is not told to you. If you do have a variety on there, I would encourage you to look online. You can usually find research that went behind developing that specific variety to see, does that meet what I'm needing on my farm? Does it have the disease resistance? Does it have the yield? Does it really fit here for me? The other thing you can see could be like the lot number. And so I always encourage people on everything, even I tell my kids in 4-H for livestock, keep those labels that have lot numbers and codes like that, because if there's ever a recall, if a company ever says, hey, we accidentally found a noxious weed in this product, you want to make sure, take a picture with your cell phone, make a copy at home, whatever, you keep that so that if you know, was your product affected. So from feeds to seed labels, kind of knowing that lot number and where it came from can be important in the future. The other thing is the origin. So you can see kind of where it's coming from. And it could be if you're buying seed from certain areas, you may know that, I don't know, Canada had a disease outbreak or something. So you might be more careful in the years following that when you're buying seed or whatever it is. And then the other thing you want to look at is purity and germination. So purity tells you, is all the seed that I'm buying, is it all orchard grass seed, or is it 80% orchard grass seed and then there's some Timothy and some foxtail and some other stuff in there that maybe I don't want? So looking at that label, it has to clearly tell you, what kind of seeds are in there. And then germination tells you out of 10, 10 seeds, 100 seeds, however many, how many are actually going to germinate within the reasonable timeline. So clover and other legumes are particularly important to look at that because they tend to have lower germination. And so, if I put out 10 pounds of clover seed and the germination is only 60%, well, then I only know 6 pounds of that clover I'm expecting to germinate. The other 4 pounds may germinate next year, 4 years, never. So those are some of the important things to look at on that seed label. Anything else that I missed on there?
Yeah, I always throw mine in here. And that is, these days, there's a lot of seeds are potentially coated. They have a variety of coatings on those. And that can be up to a third. So when you buy 10 pounds of seed, you may only be buying about 6.6 pounds of actual seed. So it's one of those things when we start talking about how many pounds of acre do you put? How many pounds do you put out? Well, I'll put 10 pounds out. Well, if you put 10 pounds of coated seed, you're really only putting 6 pounds of seed out. And then they counter with the fact that the coated seed has got better germination, will do very well. And it's the same price as the other seed. So I know in my situations, I have purchased seed before, specifically asking not be coated and still got coated seed. And I have seen other situations. I've been in a few of them. So you really got to do a buyer's beware when you take a look at these different kind of seeds that we're looking at. And that's important to look at if you want coating or you don't want coating. And then also the other things can be on there are some things such as fungicides, insecticides, depending on which seed you're buying, that come along with that point. So some coatings are great because when you got very, very dinky seeds, they help you seed through your seeder and help you out with that aspect. And it's a good thing to have. But again, you're not putting on the total pounds that you were talking about to begin with if it's got a coating on it.
All right, thank you. We don't have any questions in the chat box at this time, so we're waiting maybe on a couple more questions. So again, this was our last session for the Forage Forum Friday. You do have the link to the YouTube channel. All of the videos are up there up until today's video, which I will work on this afternoon and hopefully by next weekend. Next Friday, I'll have that done. But go back, kind of watch some of those previous sessions that we've done, things like that. If you have questions, you can always reach out and contact myself or any of our speakers as well. Also this week, we had to postpone our Indiana Forage Council annual meeting. So it is actually taking place next Thursday, on Thursday, March 3rd. So if you are able to make it, send me an email or give me a call and I can get you onto the registration list. It's $20 at the door for the meal. We just need to know by Monday if you are interested in attending. So. All right, I'm not seeing anybody else or anything else. So any other last words, Brooke or Mark?
I think we looked at today with all the different kind of labeling, it does get very, very confusing. And so when you look at these animal welfare labels and the organic labels, you really have to work with people who know what they're talking about. And that's what these third-party people and other varieties of people are. So it requires some outside help.
Yep, certainly does. All right, well, if we have nothing else, we greatly appreciate you all again being on today, as well as any other sessions you have attended. And so with that, have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully we will put another session together in the future. So kind of pay attention to that. I'll send an email out if we do another one of these rounds in the future. So thank you all and have a wonderful weekend.